My father said it at my own graduation dinner, for words that landed harder than anything he'd ever said to me before. I wish she'd graduated. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. We both knew exactly who he meant, sitting 2 seats away from me at that restaurant table, my younger sister Olivia, who had dropped out of nursing school 18 months earlier and had spent the time since working at a coffee shop, living in our parents' basement, and somehow, in my father's eyes, remaining the daughter with more genuine potential. I had just graduated with my master's degree in mechanical engineering, top of my program, a job offer already signed, sealed, and waiting for me at an aerospace firm 3 states away, the kind of position that took most engineers a decade to reach. My father looked at the dessert menu, not at me, when he said it. Olivia just has a different kind of intelligence, he continued, as if explaining something I should have already understood. The kind that doesn't always show up on paper. I wish she'd finished. I think she would have ended up doing something more meaningful than you're about to do. My mother said nothing. Olivia, sitting across from me, looked down at her plate, her face carrying an expression I couldn't quite read, something between embarrassment and a kind of resigned familiarity, like she'd heard some version of this comparison many times before, just never delivered quite this directly, in quite this setting, on quite this particular night. I didn't argue with my father that evening. I finished my dinner. I drove home to my apartment, packed 2 more boxes for my move, and didn't say anything to anyone about what he'd said for almost 3 weeks. My name is Daniela Ferreira, and this is the story of what happened over the following 2 years, and what my father didn't know about either of his daughters until the night everything finally became impossible to misunderstand. Subscribe right now. New story every single day. I need to tell you about our family before I tell you about that dinner, because the comparison my father made that night had been building quietly for almost 2 decades before it ever found its way into words. My father, Antonio Ferreira, immigrated to this country at 22, working construction for almost 15 years before eventually starting his own small contracting business, the kind of steady, demanding work that builds a particular relationship to achievement, one measured in visible physical results rather than the more abstract accomplishments that would eventually define my own career path. Olivia was born 3 years after me, and from almost the beginning, our personalities diverged in ways that shaped how our parents related to each of us. I was quiet, methodical, the kind of child who took genuine pleasure in solving problems carefully, who brought home report cards filled with consistent high marks that, while genuinely impressive, never seemed to generate the same emotional response from my father that Olivia's particular gifts did. Olivia was different. She had an effortless warmth that drew people toward her, a natural charisma that made her, even as a child, the center of any room she occupied. She struggled academically in ways I never did, but she compensated with an emotional intelligence that was genuinely remarkable, the kind of intuitive understanding of other people's feelings that can't easily be taught or measured by grades. My father, I think, saw something of himself in Olivia's particular gifts, the kind of practical, people-centered intelligence that had allowed him to build a successful contracting business despite never finishing high school himself. My own academic success, by contrast, felt to him, I came to understand over many years, like a different category of achievement, entirely real and impressive but somehow less connected to the values he most deeply respected. This isn't to say my father was unkind to me growing up. He wasn't. He attended my school events, expressed genuine pride at my accomplishments in the moment they occurred. But there was always underneath that pride a particular quality of distance, as if my success existed in a category he respected intellectually without fully connecting to emotionally, in the way he connected instinctively and completely to whatever Olivia happened to be doing. I want to tell you about Olivia's path through young adulthood honestly, because I think the contrast between how our parents responded to her struggles versus how they would have responded to similar struggles from me matters considerably to understanding everything that followed. Olivia enrolled in nursing school at 19, a decision our parents celebrated enthusiastically, the kind of practical, people-centered career path that aligned naturally with the warmth and emotional intelligence everyone had always recognized in her. She struggled with the program's rigorous science coursework almost immediately, the kind of detailed, methodical study that had never been her natural strength. I want to be careful and fair here, because I don't think Olivia's struggles reflected any lack of genuine capability. I think nursing school's particular demands simply didn't align with how her mind worked, The same way my own academic strengths wouldn't have translated easily into Olivia's natural gift for immediately understanding what another person needed emotionally in any given moment. She failed 2 required courses in her second year, retook them, struggled again, and eventually, after nearly 3 years of increasingly difficult effort, withdrew from the program entirely, 18 months before what would have been her graduation. Our parents' response to this withdrawal was, I noticed clearly even at the time, considerably gentler than I suspect their response would have been to a similar struggle from me. My father framed Olivia's departure from nursing school not as a failure but as evidence that the program simply hadn't recognized her actual talents, a system failing to accommodate a different, equally valid kind of intelligence. Olivia moved back into our parents' basement apartment, taking a position at a local coffee shop while she figured out her next steps. A transition our parents supported without the particular disappointment I suspect would have accompanied a similar trajectory from me. While Olivia was navigating her departure from nursing school, I was completing my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering, a program I had chosen specifically because of a genuine fascination with how physical systems worked, the particular satisfaction of understanding exactly why and how complex mechanisms function the way they did. I graduated with honors, immediately continuing into a master's program at the same university, drawn by an opportunity to work on aerospace propulsion research with a professor whose work I had genuinely admired throughout my undergraduate years. I want to be honest about something complicated in my own experience during this period. I noticed, with growing clarity, the particular asymmetry in how our parents discussed our respective paths. Calls home would spend considerable time on Olivia's emotional state, her job satisfaction, the various social dynamics of her coffee shop position, conversations that carried genuine warmth and attentiveness. My own updates, by contrast, tended to receive a more perfunctory acknowledgement, my father's responses often pivoting quickly back to questions about Olivia or general family logistics rather than engaging deeply with the specifics of research I was, frankly, quite excited about. I don't want to overstate this asymmetry into something more dramatic than it actually was during this period. It was subtle, the kind of pattern that exists more in accumulated weight than in any single dramatic incident. But it was real, and it shaped, gradually, my own relationship to sharing my achievements with my family, a growing tendency to mention things briefly rather than elaborate, anticipating the limited emotional engagement that elaboration tended to receive. I want to walk through the graduation dinner in detail, because the specific texture of that evening matters considerably to understanding why my father's comment landed with the particular weight it carried. I had just completed my master's degree, graduating at the top of my program, with a job offer already secured at a respected aerospace engineering firm, a position that represented years of focused, demanding work finally reaching its natural culmination. My parents organized a dinner at a nice restaurant to celebrate, and I want to acknowledge fairly that this gesture itself represented genuine pride and care, the kind of celebration that suggested my accomplishment mattered to them, regardless of the complicated dynamics I'd been navigating for years. Olivia attended, along with my parents and a few extended family members, the kind of modest but genuine celebration that should have felt, by every reasonable measure, like an evening of straightforward joy. The shift occurred during dessert when my father, in what I genuinely believe he experienced as simply continuing a comfortable family conversation, began discussing Olivia's recent decision to enroll in a part-time business certificate program, a new direction she was pursuing with characteristic enthusiasm. I'm really proud of her for finding her own path, he said, looking toward Olivia with genuine warmth. Not everyone's intelligence shows up the same way. Then, turning his attention briefly back toward the table generally, he made the comment that would define the rest of that evening. I wish she'd graduated, he said, looking at the dessert menu rather than at either of his daughters. From nursing school, I mean. I think she would have ended up doing something more meaningful than what you're about to do. I want to describe my internal response in that moment as precisely as I can, because I think the precision matters. I did not feel surprised exactly. The underlying current of this comparison had existed for years, in subtler forms. What I felt was something closer to a specific clarifying pain, the particular ache of finally hearing directly, in concrete language, something I had spent years sensing but never quite having confirmed. I didn't respond to my father's comment that evening. I want to explain why, because I think the choice itself matters to understanding what eventually happened. I had learned, over many years of navigating this particular family dynamic, That direct confrontation rarely produced the outcome I genuinely wanted. My father, when challenged directly about comments like this one, tended to respond defensively, reframing any pushback as evidence that I was somehow attacking Olivia rather than simply expressing my own hurt at the comparison itself. I finished my dinner. I participated in the remainder of the evening's conversation with what I hope appeared as reasonable composure, though I genuinely don't know how successfully I masked what I was actually feeling. I drove home that night to my apartment, where I was in the middle of packing for my move to begin the new position 3 states away, and I sat for a long time among half-filled boxes, turning my father's comment over in my mind, trying to understand exactly what it revealed about how he actually saw the relative value of what each of his daughters had built. I called my closest friend from graduate school, a woman named Priscilla who had become, over the years of our shared program, someone I trusted with the complicated parts of my life that I rarely discussed with my own family directly. "What are you going to do?" she asked once I'd explained what had happened. "I don't know," I said. "Probably nothing. That's usually what I do." "You could tell him how that landed," she said. "Directly. Not as an attack on Olivia. Just as honest information about what that comment actually did to you." I told her I'd think about it. I didn't for nearly 3 weeks do anything at all. I moved 3 states away approximately 3 weeks after that dinner, beginning my new position at the aerospace firm, the specific demands of a new job in a new city occupying most of my immediate attention in ways that allowed the painful weight of my father's comment to recede, temporarily, into something more manageable. I want to be honest about the texture of my relationship with my family during the following months, because I think it represents a meaningful, if quiet, shift from the patterns that had existed before. I called home less frequently than I had previously, not from any deliberate decision to withdraw, but from a kind of natural protective distance that emerged without my fully articulating it even to myself. When I did call, conversations felt, increasingly, like careful navigation rather than the easy connection I genuinely wanted to maintain with my parents. Olivia and I, interestingly, grew somewhat closer during this period, our own relationship operating largely independent of our parents' particular dynamics with each of us. She called me directly several times, genuinely curious about my new position, my new city, the actual substance of the engineering work I was doing. Questions that carried more genuine engagement than I'd often received from either of our parents directly. "Dad's comment at your dinner was awful," she told me, during one of these calls several months after the fact. "I should have said something that night. I've thought about it a lot since." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "I think I've gotten used to him talking about me like I'm this fragile thing that needs protecting," she said. "Like my whole identity is built around being the daughter who needs extra grace because things didn't work out the conventional way. I think it's easier for me to just let him have that narrative than to push back on it, even when it costs you something." This conversation, I want to note, marked an important shift in my own understanding of the family dynamic, separate from my father's specific comparison. Olivia, it turned out, experienced her own complicated relationship to the role our father had constructed for her, a role that, while ostensibly protective and generous, also carried its own particular limitations. I want to spend considerable time on Olivia's own trajectory during the 2 years following that graduation dinner, because I think her story, separate from the comparison our father made, deserves to be told with genuine respect for what she was actually building. The business certificate program Olivia had begun shortly before my graduation dinner proved to be, over the following months, a genuine turning point in her professional direction. Unlike nursing school's heavy emphasis on detailed scientific coursework, the program's focus on practical business operations and client relationship management aligned naturally with her genuine strengths. She excelled, completing the certificate with strong marks and immediately beginning a position at a growing local business consulting firm, work that allowed her natural emotional intelligence and people skills to become genuine professional assets, rather than qualities that existed somewhat outside the framework of conventional academic or career success. Over the following 2 years, Olivia's career developed with real momentum. She was promoted twice, eventually managing client relationships for the firm's most significant accounts, work that, while less conventionally prestigious than aerospace engineering, represented genuine, substantial professional achievement built specifically around her authentic capabilities. I want to be clear that I never resented Olivia's success during this period. If anything, watching her build something genuinely suited to her actual strengths, after years of struggling within a framework that didn't fit her, was one of the more satisfying developments I witnessed within our family during these 2 years. What I struggled with separately was watching our father's continued framing of Olivia's eventual success as evidence that had he been right all along, that her different kind of intelligence had simply needed the right outlet, language that, while genuinely celebrating Olivia's accomplishments, continued to exist within an implicit comparison that positioned my own more conventional academic success as somehow less authentic or meaningful. While Olivia was building her career in business consulting, my own work at the aerospace firm was developing in ways that, I'll admit, I found genuinely difficult to discuss with my family, given the particular emotional weight that academic and professional success had accumulated within our specific family dynamics. I was assigned, approximately 8 months into my position, to a significant propulsion research project, work that built directly on the graduate research I had completed during my master's program. Over the following 18 months, I contributed substantially to development that eventually resulted in a patent filing, my name listed among the credited inventors, a genuinely significant professional achievement that I shared with my family in what I now recognize as a deliberately understated way. I mentioned the patent filing during a phone call with my mother briefly, almost in passing, the way I had learned over years to discuss my own accomplishments within our family, anticipating limited engagement and therefore offering limited detail. My mother's response was warm but general, the kind of supportive acknowledgement that didn't necessarily reflect deep engagement with the actual substance of what I'd accomplished. My father, when my mother mentioned it to him later, according to what she relayed to me afterward, responded with a brief "that's good" before returning to a conversation about Olivia's recent promotion. I want to be honest about how this particular asymmetry affected me during this period. I don't think it reflected any conscious decision on my parents' part to value Olivia's achievements over mine. I think it reflected, more accurately, a genuine difference in how readily they could emotionally connect to and understand the substance of what each of us was actually building, Olivia's client relationship work feeling more immediately graspable and relatable than the technical specifics of aerospace propulsion research. Approximately 2 years after the original graduation dinner, my parents organized another family gathering, this time celebrating Olivia's most recent promotion at her consulting firm, a milestone that genuinely deserved celebration, and that I attended with authentic enthusiasm for my sister's accomplishment. I want to walk through this second dinner carefully, because the parallel structure to the original graduation dinner matters considerably to understanding the eventual resolution of this story. The evening proceeded warmly, my father expressing genuine, effusive pride in Olivia's trajectory, the kind of emotional engagement that, I'll admit, I still found myself comparing, perhaps unfairly, to the more muted responses my own achievements had typically received. Near the end of the dinner, my mother, in what I believe was a genuine attempt to include me more fully in the evening's celebratory energy, asked about the status of my work, specifically referencing the patent filing I had mentioned briefly months earlier. "Tell everyone about your patent," she said. "I don't think I fully understood what that actually meant when you mentioned it before." I want to describe what happened next carefully because it represents, I think, the actual turning point this story has been building toward. I explained in more detail than I had previously offered the actual substance of the propulsion research, the specific technical innovation my work had contributed to, and the practical significance of the patent itself, which involved technology that was, at that point, being incorporated into actual aerospace systems with meaningful commercial and technical implications. My father listened, I noticed, with more genuine attention than he had typically offered to my professional updates, asking, to my surprise, several follow-up questions about the specific mechanics of what I developed. "I had no idea this was the scale of what you were working on," he said, once I'd finished explaining. "I think I've been thinking about your work as just school stuff, theoretical. I didn't understand it was actually building something real." I want to tell you about the conversation that followed, because it represents the genuine resolution this story has been building toward, even though it arrived more gently than a dramatic confrontation might suggest. After dinner, while the rest of the family was occupied with dessert and coffee, my father asked if I would walk with him outside the restaurant, a request that immediately signaled something more serious than casual conversation. "I need to say something to you," he said, once we were standing outside, away from the rest of the family, "about what I said at your graduation dinner, about wishing Olivia had graduated instead." I was quiet, waiting, genuinely uncertain what direction this conversation might take. I've thought about that comment a lot over the past 2 years, he continued. I think I said something that night that I genuinely believed at the time, but that I understand now was deeply unfair to you, and probably unfair to Olivia too in a different way. What do you mean? I asked. I think I built this idea a long time ago, that Olivia's intelligence and yours existed in some kind of competition, he said. That valuing what she had meant somehow needing to diminish what you had. As if there wasn't room for both of you to be genuinely remarkable in completely different ways. He was quiet for a moment, gathering whatever he wanted to say next. Watching her build her own success in her own way over these past 2 years, that's been wonderful, he said. But I think I used her success, without fully realizing it, to validate a narrative where I'd been right to doubt the value of what you were building. I think some part of me needed her path to prove something about the limitations of conventional achievement, because I never finished school myself, and your success sometimes felt like it existed in a world I couldn't fully access or understand. And tonight, I asked, when you actually understood what the patent meant? Tonight I really understood for the first time, that what you've built isn't some abstract academic exercise, he said. It's real. It matters in the actual world, the same way Olivia's work matters. I don't know why it took me explaining it in those specific terms to actually see that. But I'm sorry it took 2 years, and I'm sorry for what I said that night, which I think hurt you considerably more than I let myself fully understand at the time. I want to describe what has actually changed since that conversation outside the restaurant, because I think an honest accounting matters more than a falsely tidy resolution where one apology fixes years of accumulated dynamics entirely. My father has, over the months since that second dinner, made genuine, sustained effort to engage more substantively with my professional life, asking detailed questions during our calls, requesting that I send him articles or explanations when new developments occur in my work that he might not immediately understand. This effort, I want to be clear, doesn't erase the years of asymmetry that preceded it, nor does it mean every interaction since has been perfectly calibrated. There are still moments where old patterns surface, where Olivia's more immediately relatable accomplishments receive easier emotional engagement than my own more technical work. But something genuine has shifted, a willingness on my father's part to actually examine and name the pattern, rather than simply continuing it unconsciously, which I've come to understand matters considerably more than any single perfect interaction. My relationship with Olivia separately has deepened considerably through this entire period, built on a foundation that exists independent of our parents' particular dynamics with each of us. We talk regularly now, genuinely curious about each other's very different professional worlds, neither of us needing the other's success diminished in order to feel secure in our own. If you've ever existed in a family where your particular kind of achievement felt less emotionally legible to the people who raised you, I think you understand something about the specific weight of hearing directly that someone wished you'd been someone else. My name is Daniela Ferreira. The patent is part of actual aerospace systems now, technology that exists in the real world in ways that finally, genuinely, made sense to my father once he understood what it actually meant. My father and I are still building something more honest than what existed before that second dinner, slowly, the way most genuine repair happens. Drop a comment if you've ever had your particular kind of intelligence or achievement feel less valued than a sibling's, even when nobody intended the comparison to land the way it did. Tell me what eventually helped the people in your life actually understand what you'd built. Subscribe if you're new here. New story every single day. I'll see you in the next one.